Hey guys, on this episode of the Dr. Tina Show, I'm going solo and I'm going to be talking all about cholesterol today. You guys have asked me for this episode for the last couple of years. And while I have talked about cholesterol on a myriad of other episodes on the Dr. Tina Show, I haven't actually done a whole solo episode about it. So this one's going to be a bit beefy. I think you're going to learn a few things. I think even those of you who are healthcare practitioners out there will hopefully learn a few things. And let's jump in. So first off, I am encased in ice here in Oregon. We are literally on like day 4 of the ice apocalypse and I'm freezing. So I've got my hoodie on and my hat on. And, those of you on YouTube can just watch. This is pretty much my uniform all the time. Black hoodie, black hat. Sometimes I put some lip gloss on. Who would have thought? So let me pull up my notes here. I'm going to be relying on them heavily because I got a lot of information I want to make sure that we talk about. First off, this is a heated topic in medicine. A lot of people are subscribed to it's such nonsense, to be honest with you. And if you go back, there's a book called Prescribing by Numbers, and he talks all about, I can't remember the author's name, I'm sorry. He talks all about how basically a vegetarian group of people got a hold of what the nutrition standards were going to be in the United States, coupled up with big pharma with an agenda to sell statin drugs, which were new at the time. And you have the advent of really a propagandized push to get some pharmaceuticals into some bodies. And so I'll talk about statins here in a second, but it's a really heated topic. And there's a lot of doctors that still subscribe to the old ways. I mean, for instance, in 2005, a study came out showing that red meat did not cause problems with cholesterol, and that it was not the problem. It was processed red meat. And yet you still, in 2024, I mean, almost 20 years later, and at the time I remember in 2005 thinking, God, it's been long enough. Like, thank you for somebody for finally coming out and saying it. I mean, I felt like it was an old dinosaur narrative back then. And here we are all these decades later. So if some of you think I'm kind of a bitch, like, please understand why. I have been trying to get this information out for decades. And I'm so tired of arguing with people about it who are ignorant intentionally and aren't keeping up with the data. So no, red meat's not the problem. Let's just stop having that conversation. I don't even want to argue. So this is a heated topic. And obviously I have some emotion in it too. I will start by telling you that, full disclaimer, I am not your doctor. Do not discontinue any of your medications. Do not, throw caution to the wind and try to deal with this solo. I am not your doctor. I am not giving you medical advice. This is education only. I'm giving you my educated take on cholesterol. And it's been a passionate topic for me for a long time. I always ran super low. I still run low. And being low is really bad. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But when I actually started getting more cholesterol in my diet, my life profoundly changed for the better. And it's not just the cholesterol. It's I've been a big fan of beef for a long, long time, for decades. And eating high saturated fat foods really turned the ship around for me and my health and my mental health and so many other things. So I speak from personal experience, but I also have helped a lot of patients work through this. When you tell patients cholesterol is not the enemy, and that the cholesterol they're eating and the foods they're eating is not the enemy, they look at you like you have two heads. It's wild. It's wild to watch the two lobes of their brain fight with each other. And then usually their initial reaction is to get angry with you. Because I could imagine if I'd spent decades withholding cholesterol from my diet, you'd be a miserable, we'd all be miserable people. Your brain's, 20 to 25% cholesterol. You need cholesterol to make your hormones. You need cholesterol in your diet. And yet, most of the cholesterol we're eating actually doesn't even impact our endogenous production of cholesterol. I'll get to that in a second. Point being, though, is saturated fats are not the enemy, and folks have a really hard time wrapping their heads around this. So anyway, all that to say, I'm not your doctor. I'm also not available for questions. I cannot answer your emails. I cannot give you medical advice. I cannot answer personal medical questions. I cannot make personal referrals. I legally cannot refer you to somebody. There's no database of oh yeah, I know exactly a doctor in your small town. I mean, that's an absurd thing to assume I would even know. I mean, no disrespect, but how the F would I know that? And number two, I can't legally do it. I can only make referrals from actual patients of mine. And since I have very few patients and I'm not taking any patients, I can't help you. I inevitably get even though I say this over and over, and I say this right now because I inevitably get, somebody will send me a long, really sad email, and it's frequent, either a DM or an email begging me to please do a consult with them because they can't find anyone to answer them. And I just can't do it. I'm just not available for that. So please don't ask. It hurts my heart. I just don't respond to those emails anymore. So, all that to say, let's jump in here. Let's get into the topic of cholesterol. I love you all. I appreciate you all. I just can't, I'm not available past this podcast is my point. So cardiovascular disease is the number one leading cause of death in the United States. It outpaced COVID in 2020 and 2021 by 3 times as many deaths. And yet, you don't hear much about it. And it's been really normalized. And they don't even talk about the root cause, which I'm going to talk about today. And it's because it's an incredibly profitable condition, right? There's a lot of companies making a lot of money off of this. And I don't think that people understand the physiology or maybe they're just disregarding their first year medical school basic sciences. We saw a lot of that over the past few years. So I don't see why this would be any different. So let's talk about cholesterol, right? That seems to be the supervillain in the storyline of cardiovascular disease and heart disease. And is it really the villain that it's been made out to be? I say no, not at all. And I'm going to tell you why. I used to have this chart. It's somewhere in my house. I moved my clinic. I moved out of my clinic, closed it down years ago. And I've got this laminated chart that's different colors. And what it was somebody actually put together, they went through the World Health Organization's data and they put together all causes of mortality, or the main ones at least. There was at least 20 different causes on there, and their relationship to cholesterol levels. And in every single case, those with super low cholesterol were dying at a much higher rate than those with high cholesterol. Right. And that was very compelling. And so I would show this to every patient when I had this conversation in clinic. And it was usually on the first or second visit. And I'd be like, this is, you've been lied to. And because the folks with the highest cholesterol levels on those, and this is all over the world, mind you, the folks with the highest cholesterol levels on that chart were living the longest with less disease. So, I mean, that's fairly compelling. And people would balk. And obviously, again, like the 2 lobes of their brain would start fighting, because this is back in the early 2000s when I'm started having this conversation with patients, and patients were like, what? And their initial reaction is to fight back, which is, that seems to be my life story. Tell people things that they're not comfortable hearing. That's actually the truth. And then they get mad at you. And low levels of cholesterol have been known to cause more accidents. Folks with low cholesterol, i.e. me, this is something I've battled for a long time, increases of all-cause mortality, increases from accidents, higher levels of dementia, and lowered immune function. Turns out you need cholesterol for a healthy immune function and brain function. So again, 20 to 25% of your brain is literally made of cholesterol. If you were to look at a cadaver's brain, it's like the consistency of butter almost. It's wild. Hi, Murphy. I got little Murphy here. He's awfully cute. He got a haircut. Let's show everybody your haircut, Murphy. Oh, he's got his little coat on because we're so cold here. He got a little haircut though, so you can actually see his little face. Hi, Murph. He's so cute. He's such a nice dog. Havanese are really cool little dogs. Brave, fun, smart little critters. Also, the cholesterol you ingest has very little to do with the cholesterol levels in your blood. As I said, your endogenous or internal production of cholesterol has way more to do with some factors I'm about to go into than it does with what you're eating. Now, if you're type 2 diabetic, because of what I'm about to bring up, it will impact you. So, you start slamming fat, especially bad fats, right? We don't ever want to eat bad fats. I've talked about this in the past, and some call it seed oils, but rancid, gross trans fats and industrial seed oils are garbage for your cells, and we don't want to eat them. So that's not going to help anybody's cholesterol level. But it's not because of what you think. It's not the cholesterol you're eating magically turning into the cholesterol in your blood that they run on labs. That's not how this happens. I'll tell you why. The bulk of the cholesterol that you see on your labs is not coming from your daily egg yolks. So please, for the sake of God, stop throwing away your egg yolks. It makes no sense to me. When people tell me they eat egg whites, I'm like, why? Why would you do that? Like, why would you throw away the yolk? The yolks where all the nutrients are, things that's really hard to get, things that are really good for your brain, like choline. Like, look at that yellow color. Like, why on earth would you be eating? I mean, I would almost consider egg whites worthless, to be honest with you, if you were to ask me to compare them to yolks. But Somehow we got that. You see what I'm saying? Like in my lifetime, the nonsense I've watched evolve in the nutrition world is just mind boggling, that people still to this very day are like, oh, I'm a strength and conditioning person and I'm going to up my egg whites. And I'm like, why don't you just up your eggs in whole? Just eat more eggs, right? Like makes no sense. So anyway, it's not coming from your eggs. It's coming from your endogenous production. It turns out that cholesterol is the precursor for all of your sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. And when your body is aging and your hormonal production is waning naturally, your body starts to endogenously increase production of cholesterol in an attempt to supply the body and the specific hormonal organs with the substrate to make more hormones. So it's a natural reaction to aging to have your cholesterol creep up. Now, in today's society, maybe 20, 30 years ago, I could have said that would be the cause of your higher cholesterol as you age. I am going to probably blame it on busted metabolic health, which you guys know my whole platform is about metabolic health. So that's what we're going to talk about here in detail, plus a couple other topics that tie into it, because that's actually what's going on with people. And many of the different roles of cholesterol, like we think of LDLs and HDL. We think LDL is the bad guy and HDL is the good guy. It's way more complicated than that. And that is not correct. But their roles in our body are, energy delivery, quorum sensing, meaning they help you neutralize pathogens. They're really intimately related to your immune system function. Fat soluble deliveries. So getting, your fat soluble K, A, E, D around the body. And then antioxidant delivery. Now, these LDLs we know contain high levels of antioxidants, and it's because when free radicals attack LDL and they oxidize, LDLs oxidize, that's when we have trouble. It's not the LDL that's the bad guy. It's oxidized LDL. That's the bad guy. We don't want that. And it has its own endogenous supply of antioxidants to protect it. So anyway, I have a whole episode that I recorded with Dr. Lauren Latanza. I'll give you the episode at the end. It's also going to be in the show notes. She goes into detail about the different types of cholesterol. I don't want to go over that again. Please go listen to that episode. And just know that it's not inherently cholesterol that's the bad guy. LDL is not a bad guy. HDL isn't always a great guy. In fact, some data that I just looked at yesterday showed that those with long-term, those with elevated LDL might do better than those with elevated HDL. We're always trying to get people's HDL up versus their LDL. Like we don't have this down, guys. Let's just put it that way. And you can do advanced lipid testing. And that's what Dr. Latanza talks about on that episode. But it's really not as simple as they try to make it in your yearly physical when they're like, your LDL's high and your HDL's low. Let's give you fish oil. That's not it. They are missing the plot completely. Busted metabolic health and rocking elevated blood sugars is what's messing up and oxidizing your cholesterol and your LDL, right? And we'll get back to this because LDL we know is higher in people with type 2 diabetes, actually type 1. Anybody with diabetes whose blood sugar is not well regulated is dealing with LDL elevations. They're also usually dealing with triglyceride elevations. And so it's not as simple as looking at the labs and making a blank judgment on the patient. And it's certainly the answer is not supplying them with a statin to take for the rest of their life to lower their cholesterol levels. Like that's ridiculous. And I actually have a whole episode on that. I'll share in the show notes as well, all about statins. Statins, which are cholesterol lowering drugs, are the #1 selling drug in the United States. So the war on cholesterol might have something to do with that. Just a thought, right? When I see elevated cholesterol in my patients, these are the first 3 questions I have. These are the first things I think of clinically. #1, how's their metabolic health? #2, how's their thyroid function? And #3, how's their hormonal status? So let's break these down. #1, insulin resistance. That's their metabolic health. Insulin resistance is rampant. 94. So data from 2018 that was published in 2021 showed that 94% of US adults have busted cardiometabolic health. So that's probably 94% of those of you listening have busted cardiometabolic health. What does that mean? It means you're rocking insulin resistance, which means you are on the path to type 2 diabetes. There's no other way to put it. There's not a gentle way to deliver that information. 94% of US adults are rocking high insulin levels with some level of insulin resistance, and they are busting not only their metabolic health, but their cardiovascular health, and they are walking headlong into type 2 diabetes. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that sucks because that's a whole other ballgame. And you have heard me say this on other episodes. By the time somebody gets to the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, their metabolic health is so completely busted that turning that ship around is a nightmare. It is far better to avoid it. It is far better to know early on what you're dealing with. I have a free guide. You guys can go to my website and click on the red button and download my Assess Your Metabolic Health free guide. You can go to my Instagram. It's right there as well. And we'll make it available in the show notes. It is the international diagnostic criteria that was developed after I started in medicine, believe it or not. I started in medicine as my mentor's receptionist. Actually started before that, working in the hospitals in college in the Dementia and Alzheimer's clinic. So I have been looking at cholesterol issues of the brain for a long time. I'll get to that in a moment. But the whole metabolic syndrome thing didn't even exist back then. It was just a thought. And my mentor was diagnosing it and treating it. They were calling it Syndrome X at the time, but it's basically you're rocking pre-diabetes for a couple decades before you walk into diabetes. And I've got tons of episodes all about metabolic health you can go back and listen to. But insulin provides an integrated and concerted set of signals that allows for the balance of nutrient demand and availability. It's really a necessary and important hormone in our bodies, but we need to keep it in check. Impaired nutrition contributes to hyperlipidemia and insulin resistance, causing hyperglycemia, which is elevated blood sugars and metabolic dysfunction. But interestingly, hyperglycemia causes and leads to the insulin resistance. So it's a chicken and egg. It's a vicious cycle, and it's a roller coaster folks have a very hard time getting off of the only solution really is lifestyle interventions, which there's no drug, there's no miraculous anything. There's no miraculous peptide. There are helpers, there are tools that are helpful, but they don't work unless you're doing the work. And I'll talk about more of that in a second. This condition alters cellular metabolism and intracellular signaling that negatively impacts all your cells. And then this hyperlipidemia, or elevated cholesterol, elevated lipids, leads to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes as well. So they don't know what's causing what. But I'll tell you, if you just look at the timeline of a human being, they usually start to rock insulin resistance, and the response is they get hyperlipidemia. But elevated and chronic hyperlipidemia will drive people into type 2 diabetes as well. You glom up the liver, you mess up everything. You mess up the pancreas, you mess up digestion. I mean, on and on it goes. So you mess up the brain. So how do you get off that roller coaster, right? That's what we got to talk about here. Hang in there with me. Remember, again, this study I talked about that came out in 2021 that was looking at data from 2018 that showed that 94% of US adults were cardiometabolically busted, i.e. they were insulin resistant, i.e. they were on their way to type 2 diabetes. So insulin resistance is the root cause driver of cardiovascular disease and elevated cholesterol in a myriad of different ways. And you can listen to more about this on episode 98 of my show called High Blood Pressure and Metabolic Health. I did a whole episode about this. So go check that out and get more information there. Just so you understand how, because a lot of you are asking me about high blood pressure. I asked my audience to give me their top questions, and I realized a ton of those questions I'd answered in that episode. So just know that these are a chicken and egg situation. Insulin resistance, chicken and egg with high cholesterol and cardiovascular disease, right? Which came first? What do we treat first? The only way out is through what I call all the things: strength training, adding muscle. You cannot actually oxidize your fat, burn it. You cannot burn your fat. If you have elevated insulin, your fat will not become mobilized for use out of your adipocytes or your fat cells. It gets locked in there in triglyceride form. And then if you don't have muscle, say it does get out, say it does get mobilized and it gets out to get burned, it gets burned via beta oxidation in your muscles. So if you don't have any skeletal muscle and you're rocking sarcopenia and you're frail and you're not strength training, you can't even burn the fat. So how would you expect to lose the weight, right? And I mean, it's a little off topic, but it's not, because we're talking about fat here. You know, that's really what cholesterol is. So anyway, if folks somehow dodge this heart disease bullet, remember this. This is really important. If insulin resistance is the root cause, in my strong clinical opinion, of cardiovascular disease, it is the root cause of cardiometabolic dysfunction, right? And people somehow dodge that heart attack or that heart disease bullet, it's going to manifest later in their life as dementia and brain problems, because we know, and we've known this since the early 2000s. And I do not understand how this is not common knowledge at this point, because we had the data in the early 2000s that Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. What happens is this hyperglycemic state in the brain really mucks up the 25% of your brain that's cholesterol, and it messes up the fats, and it causes a whole bunch of oxidative and inflammatory damage. So really, the root cause solution is to get your blood sugar under control. And the only way to do that, listen to me, please, hear me out here. And I say this because so many people message me and say, I lost 40 pounds. And they show me before and after is like, I lost 50 pounds listening to you. I lost 60 pounds listening to you. And they still aren't strength training. And I have said this at least 100 times. And I seriously want to beat my head into a wall. Start strength training first. Start that path first before you even change your diet. Start strength training first. Please, for the love of God, start strength training first, because you need the muscle as insurance to keep this hyperglycemic state under control for the long term. You can take your metformin, you can take your berberine, you can take your GLP-1 agonist, you can take all of these things for the rest of your life. But if you don't have muscle, you are screwed. So please, hopefully that sinks in. Start with the strength training first, because the end of the game, if it doesn't take you out in the middle, the end of the game is dementia and Alzheimer's. That's not what any of us want. We don't want that for ourselves, and our children do not deserve that. Take care of yourself now so your children are not destroying their lives and their financial lives to take care of you later because you didn't take care of yourself. And I say that from experience, because my dad doesn't take care of himself, and it pisses me off to no end, because guess who is dealing with it now? My mother, and it's ruining her life. And guess who gets to pay for it later? Me. So not fun, right? All right. And there's a ton of data on this brain blood sugar scenario. I know that a lot of people want to argue with me on that and be like, it's toxins, it's this and that. Yes, and yes. And these things can compound upon each other, but trust me, more often than not, if you are rocking the edge of type 2 diabetes, which a ton of Americans are, you have a 4 times increased risk of developing Alzheimer's. So, I mean, the proof is right there. I've been very concerned about this since the 90s, and I've been very concerned about it since the early 2000s. And, I won't even go into what happens when you're metabolically busted and you're pregnant, what it does to your offspring. Like, that's a whole other conversation that I don't think most people are ready for. So anyway, I can't believe this is not the common knowledge is all. I just can't believe that this is, addressing metabolic health head on is the true solution for so many chronic lifestyle induced conditions that we're dealing with in the United States. And yet it's still not headline news. I will never understand. But anyway, number 2. So we talked about metabolic health. Number 2, thyroid function. Hypothyroidism is associated with high cholesterol and hyperlipidemia through modifications in the synthesis, absorption, circulation, and metabolism of lipids. Thyroid hormones increase cholesterol synthesis by different enzymatic processes. There's actually several mechanisms that get very sciencey and have to do with enzymes, cellular receptors, receptor signaling, and liver, your hepatic liver physiology that leads to this hyperlipidemic state, or this high cholesterol, high lipid state, when someone is in the hypothyroid state. And I'm not going to go into it here, but you can go nerd out on it further if you want to, just for the sake of time. But my mentor taught me this, and hear me out here, write this down if you're taking notes. He told me, like, day one of really following him around and learning from him. I learned how to read labs long before I ever went to medical school, because he just taught me everything so I could assist him. And he told me this straight up more than one time: screen everyone with elevated cholesterol for thyroid issues. Screen everyone with elevated cholesterol for thyroid issues. That's number 1. This was before everybody was really, carrying around excess adipose, and everybody was so metabolically busted. Not everybody was so metabolically busted back in the 90s and the early 2000s. Humans have gotten much worse off since then. And so now I would say screen everybody for insulin resistance, which we did in his clinic. And he got called names for it. And I got called names for it later when I was in clinical practice by my colleagues as well. Everyone's like, why do you think everyone's got pre-diabetes? I'm like, because everyone does or will. And here we are. So with that 2018 data of 94% of US adults. So ring the bell for Tina being right again, right? I mean, I'm not happy about that, but there it is. Reversing the low thyroid function. I mean, back in the day, all we had to do was put somebody on some thyroid hormone and their hyperlipidemia would usually reverse itself. These women, looking back, thinking about it, they probably did have some metabolic dysfunction, but he wasn't as concerned as he was about their thyroid. And so I think it's a 1-2 punch, like really making sure people are metabolically sound and also making sure that they have their thyroid assessed and treated. And I say this because I did a whole episode that you can go back and listen to. I think that every person, especially every female over the age of 40, should be on some thyroid hormone. I like desiccated thyroid. There's some data to show that if you are just slightly hypothyroid and it's subclinical, meaning it's not even showing up on labs yet, in women, like 250% increased risk of heart attack later in life. So we got to get that handled, because if the thyroid's low, the whole biochemistry of that person is going to head them towards this hyperlipidemia and this dyslipidemic state where things are messed up, right? So, but what does allopathic medicine do? They throw out their basic physiology education and they prescribe that lipid lowering statin, #1 drug in America. And because that's the standard of care and MDs have to follow the standard of care or they risk losing their license, which, get this, statins actually, we have the evidence. I just saw it. I couldn't believe it. Just a week ago, it popped up on my Medscape email. Medscape is like the American Medical Association's platform. And it said, the title was something like, the risk of statins causing type 2 diabetes. Is it still worth giving the statin? Like, it's so conclusive now. And we were trying to say this decades ago. I got in trouble. I was teaching pharmacology at the chiropractic college back in 2007, 2008, 2009. And I got in trouble by my dean because I told them that statins led to type 2 diabetes and muscle pain. I figured that was important for chiropractors to know. He got so upset with me. And I was like, I actually just pulled this off of studies. And he was like, well, we don't want to, this drug is important and we don't want to put any doubt in these doctors' minds. And I'm like, oh, so what does that remind you of, guys? The last few years, maybe? So they put them on statins, which actually induce and lead people towards a diabetic state. We know that the evidence is conclusive on that, especially as of 2023, conclusive. And they induce hypothyroidism. So how does it make any sense? Do you see the irony? Like, it's so upside down and backwards. And again, this is why sometimes I'm a bitch, because medicine is so upside down and backwards that it can cause me great rage inside my heart. Like, in my soul and my heart want to rage sometimes. Watching the last few years play out really like kind of put me over the edge of it all, because it's just such a cluster F. And I left clinical practice because I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. I could not be a part. And I wasn't even taking insurance. I didn't even have to deal with that nonsense. I just couldn't believe what medicine was becoming, even my own profession. I just wanted out. And so I closed my practice, and lo and behold, just when I finally got everything under control and I was like free, it took me like 2 years to finally, really get all the patients referred out, make sure everybody was happy and comfortable and getting what they needed. And then boom, COVID hits and I jump back in the ring to try to help everybody. And I find myself, feeling responsible again for caring for people. And so this is why I have a large barrier between the podcast and myself. And I'm not available for consults. So I'm trying to just give you guys my brain power in case, the powers that be show up with a black bag, like V for Vendetta style. And, I disappear. At least the podcast is out. All right. So go listen to episode 91 titled Thyroid Health and Dysfunction 101. I talk all about my clinical understanding of thyroid there and why I think that it's particularly important as we age. I do not think of thyroid hormone as a replacement hormone. I think of desiccated thyroid as an anti-aging longevity hormone. It's a tool in a tool bag. This is where I like to consider GLP-1s and other peptides as part of a comprehensive longevity program. This is for everyone. This is for everyone who wants to age well, right? Number 3, Hormones. That's the third thing I'm always like, where are their hormones at? Why? Because of what I said earlier, cholesterol is a precursor for our sex hormones. So if our estrogen and testosterone are waning as we age, women make more testosterone than they do estrogen. Isn't that interesting? I have a whole testosterone podcast for women. I have a whole testosterone podcast for just the men. So go back and listen to those. But testosterone is in higher elevations in the body than even estrogen is, but estrogen gets all the attention for women, and we need testosterone too. But as we age and our hormone production starts to dip, our bodies endogenously produce more cholesterol to make up for that. And boom, you start to see this escalation of cholesterol in the labs, in the lab testing, and folks freak out and get put on a statin. And I'm like, yo, they're already low testosterone. They're already low estrogen. What are you doing? This is not the solution. It's just going to tank out their hormones further, right? So I have a whole episode for you on that too. Episode 75, titled Happy Hormones Require a Healthy Metabolism. I talk more about just in general, kind of tying together the metabolic syndrome and the hormone picture. And I've got a bunch of episodes about hormones you can go back and look at too. And then there's familial hyperlipidemia. There's a lot of syllables in there. This is where people have, everyone in my family has high cholesterol, therefore I do. So I am, doomed to a fate of a life of statin drugs. No, you are not. I will tell you, I have turned around familial hyperlipidemia, more people than I can count, and gotten their cholesterol and their lipids back in the normal range. And you know how I did it? By addressing their metabolic dysfunction, their thyroid, and their hormones. I think people have a familial propensity towards metabolic dysfunction. I think like my family is just a bunch of round diabetics. Like I come from a long line of round diabetics. And I think that's more the problem, is this familial propensity towards metabolic dysfunction. And then it's showing up and we're calling it familial hyperlipidemia. And now I have seen this in young people. I have seen this in thin people, but you know what? They were cranking on the carbs and they weren't strength training, and maybe they were stressed out of their minds. I did a whole episode last week about cortisol poisoning, basically about how cortisol will tank out your metabolism. And that's what was happening to me. So I don't buy this, your genes are your fate nonsense. Genetics loads the gun, environment and lifestyle pull the trigger. So keep that in mind. And your epigenetics, right? Like what, for instance, if your grandfather was in World War II, your risk of dealing with anxiety is significantly higher. But it's not all our fate, right? How we methylate things, how our genes turn on and off has everything to do with how we choose to live our lives. So what can we do? I want to give you some action steps because I just gave you a lot of information. Number one, in this order, this is my clinical thinking order, get your metabolic health in order. That's number one. There's no shortcut for this. No one can do this for you. There's no pill that's going to hold for very long. There's no peptide magic. This is up to you. You must build muscle. I've already given you the argument for why. You must lower your carb intake. You must get your sleep and your gut health dialed in. And there's more, right? This is where we find someone to work with who can help us. This is the way. This is not just you listening to health influencers on Instagram and taking every parasite cleanse under the sun. In fact, I will tell you this, I'm going to do a whole episode about this. I quit killing off parasites a long time ago. And I'll tell you why, because in most third world countries where everybody has parasites, guess what? They do not have crazy high rates of cancer and autoimmune disease. Worms are symbiotic in many ways. Many of these parasites are symbiotic. It's in the sick individual that they become opportunistic. So hold on to that, because I will come back to that another day when I feel like opening that Pandora's box, because right now everybody wants to sell you a parasite cleanse. Anyway, there's no shortcut on metabolic health. The only way to really secure a healthy lipid levels throughout life is to build muscle and get your metabolic health in order. I have the free guide that you can go check out, assess your metabolic health. But I also have an inexpensive, wonderful program called the Metabolic Revamp Toolkit. I launched it in early 2023, so about a year ago. It's great. It's inexpensive. Grab it now because I'm about to add to it and increase the price. It's just a bunch of PDFs. It's an ebook. It's a recipe guide. It's the logical thinking as to how to get started on your metabolic health. If you've listened to every single one of my podcasts and you think you're dialed, great. But for $19 for where it's at right now, go grab it. It may be more than that by the time you get this episode, if you're listening to it, further down the line in coming weeks. But it's a great tool and it will give you a lot of insight. And as I add to it, those of you who get it at this low price, you get the add-ons for free. So grab it now. We'll make sure it's available in the show notes for you too. And it's also, if you just go to drtina.com, right at the top of the page, there's a big red banner that says grab my metabolic revamp toolkit. Go ahead and grab it. Or there's a pop-up on my Instagram. When you go to the links on my bio, it pops right up and you can purchase it right there too. Get yourself a continuous glucose monitor. I think everybody should give this a go for 2 weeks to a month at least. If you really are metabolically dysfunctional, you're going to want 3 months. But I love NutriSense. Listeners of the Dr. Tina Show can get $30 off any subscription with NutriSense. And I love them. I love their app. I love their company. I love working with them. I've been working with them for years. There are other companies out there that are also wonderful that are popping up that I really have a lot of respect for as well. But I really dig the NutriSense app in particular. And this has been one of the most profound biohacking tools I've used to get an idea of what not only my food, what it's doing to my blood sugar, but what my stress, my sleep, my workouts, all of it. How is that going? Another great tool, I think, to get a handle on things, and I'll make sure that my affiliate link is in the show notes, is for the Oura Ring. And they don't give discounts, unfortunately, but you can use my link if you want to. It's no additional cost to you, but I love the newer version. I updated to the newer Oura Ring this year and I love it. It gives you a readout of your stress levels and how your body is handling stress throughout the day. Not to mention it tells you how your sleep is doing and how your heart rate variability is doing. So it's been really I bought one for my husband. I make sure he wears it at night when I can remember to bug it. He probably gets really sick of me bugging him about everything, but I'm just trying to keep the dude alive. So, because I love him. I'd like him more. I just got him, right? I just fell in love with him a few years ago when COVID hit. So I need a few more years with him. And this ring has been really telling for him too. So really eye-opening, great information between, a good solid. I think if anything, go spend the money on a continuous glucose monitor first, and then consider an Oura Ring if you don't have one. Number 2 of the action steps is continue to build muscle. That's just a non-negotiable. My entire platform is about why muscle is medicine. I've been talking about it for a long, long time. Back when the big health gurus that you guys all love we're telling you, like, go do yoga and be vegan. I was telling you to deadlift and eat steaks, and it was not popular, and I didn't have a big account. And then my account got big just about who else was saying the same thing was Gabrielle Lyons. She and I were definitely in alignment, but man, everybody else was like, I'm a vegan yogi. And then years later, they're like, I'm having hormonal issues. Like, yeah, no shit. So anyway, build muscle. I've got about a dozen specific episodes on metabolic health and a myriad of topics like strength training, hormones, you name it. So go binge my podcast, like just binge on it for a while if my voice doesn't drive you nuts. And I promise that you will start to understand your metabolic health better. And go grab my toolkit while you're at it. Number 3, get your thyroid checked by somebody who knows what they're doing. This is easier said than done. I will apologize in advance. The medical system is busted. This is not going to be your primary care doctor. That's a whole other thing. Go listen to the episode about thyroid as to why. But I've got a couple episodes about thyroid, but most NDs naturopathic doctors don't even know what they're doing about thyroid. They don't want to prescribe it. They're scared of it. They don't know how to manage it. My mentor was like a thyroid guru, and he taught me. And then I actually precepted with another doctor who was like the hormone guru. And between the two of them, I really got to understand thyroid. That's why the joke used to be when I was in practice by my colleagues, like, Tina thinks everybody has metabolic syndrome and hypothyroidism. And guess what? They pretty much do. So again, this is not medical advice, but find somebody who can give you proper medical advice and get you what you need, and go listen to my thyroid episodes for more. Step 4, get your hormones checked. Again, most MDs and NDs have no clue. This is neither of these, thyroid or hormones, are things that are taught in school, even in naturopathic college. I'm talking licensed, legit naturopathic doctors like myself, not the fake ones that, unfortunately, I'm not going to name names, but you guys follow a bunch of them. Find someone who actually can prescribe, who knows what they're doing, and who has done continuing education on the topic, because this is something that you have to actually invest a lot of time into outside of clinical training. This is something we spent weekends and thousands of dollars learning outside of clinical training on how to prescribe physiologic levels of bioidentical hormone replacement. It's so, so important. Please stop being afraid of it, ladies. I have actually known some women for years and years and years in the online space, and they still are afraid of hormones. And I'm watching them age unnecessarily. And I'm like, yo, get a little hormone on board, a little thyroid, a little estrogen, a little progesterone, whatever you need. Find the right person to work with you who's going to do a comprehensive workup. Keep tabs on you. This is not something you try to do by yourself. And make sure you have somebody monitoring you who knows what they're doing so that you can get what you need. Sadly, I will say there's not very many of these people out there, and you are definitely going to have to pay out of pocket for them. This is not something covered by insurance. And you may likely have to travel out of state to get what you need. And that usually means you go once a year to the state they're in so that you can see them in person, because that's legally what they are required to do to prescribe you hormones. And then for the rest of the year, you've got to keep up with labs and so forth. So find who you need to find. I apologize that the system is so messed up, but that is what it is. I'm just giving you the information again until they throw the black bag over my head, like V for Vendetta. I think of this as like the Dr. Tina show is like pirate radio, right? Lastly, I want to drive home. There is no supplement that's going to fix this. Stop pounding supplements, you guys. Red rice yeast has the same side effect profile as statin drugs. They work on the same processes. So if you're pounding red rice yeast, thinking you're doing something, quote unquote, natural, you may very well still be shooting yourself in the foot and depleting yourself of CoQ10 and all kinds of other issues. It leads to muscle pain, joint weakness. There's a whole side effect profile of statins. I did a whole episode on it. I'm going to give you all the episodes in the show notes to go further listening, and I'll mention them at the end of this. But there's no quick fix. You have to get your metabolic health in order first. You have to start building muscle. That's not negotiable. Please hear that in your head when you think, I don't want to work out. Dr. Tina said it's non-negotiable. And then get your thyroid hormone and your other hormones checked out by somebody who knows what they're doing. And you will watch your lipids and your cholesterol drop into the normal range beautifully. And then if that doesn't work, then you can consider what do you need to do to lower your lipids with maybe a pharmaceutical or a supplement. I'm not saying don't do it. We do not want raging high levels of cholesterol. And if you have to take these drugs in the meantime, as you're doing all the other things, and, you work with someone who starts to lower that statin or that red rice yeast as your lifestyle improves, your health improves. This is a long process. It takes years to build adequate muscle. That's why I say start now. You are not going to notice much you'll notice strength gains, but you're not going to notice muscle growth for years. And I've been at this 10 years and I don't think I look markedly different than I did when I started, but my body composition is definitely different. And I monitor that, I'm more muscle than fat. I used to be more fat than muscle. I was the same size though. From the outside, I don't know if there's much of a difference, but it keeps that. We have a study that just came out recently. Dr. Tony Yoon and I talked about this on the podcast recently. People who strength train have better skin tone, period, and their faces look younger. So win-win. I think it's a good one. Go grab my metabolic revamp toolkit, the paid one. If you go get the toolkit, the Assess Your Metabolic Health freebie is in there, or you can just grab the freebie if that's where you're at and just see where your metabolic health is. The Assess Your Metabolic Health freebie was designed as an educational tool, not diagnostic, to take to your doctor and have a conversation and ask them to work you up for a metabolic syndrome. And because many doctors are just not doing this, like they don't want to hurt your feelings. Medicine is turned into, we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. So we're not going to point any obvious things out that might be contributing as the root cause to the problems that we're treating with pharmaceuticals. Like that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So go have the hard conversation with your doctor and see where you are on that. A really quick way, and part of what I teach you in the free Assess Your Metabolic Health freebie, the guide, is to keep your waist circumference in check and measure your waist circumference. And I give you the numbers there. So go grab that. If you want to dive deeper, grab the metabolic toolkit. All right. So some podcast episodes you want to check out also. Episode 46 with Dr. Lauren Latanza, if you want to hear about a breakdown of lipids and how they work and the glycocalyx, all kinds of good stuff. Great episode. Latanza's legit. She's awesome. She's in Scottsdale. She is taking patients. If you want to hear more about how the heart functions, more about the energetics of it, if you want to hear about why your structured water status of your cells in your body matters, check out episode 50 with Dr. Stephen Husey. He's awesome. I don't know if he's taking patients. He is in the Midwest and he is awesome. You can find both of them on Instagram as well. If you want to dive deeper into what your metabolic health has to do with all of it and your cholesterol in particular, check out Dr. Johnny Bowden, episode 37, The Great Cholesterol Myth. He wrote a book. It's awesome. You should go read that too. Lastly, I've done an entire episode on statin drugs and how evil I think they are with my friend, Dr. John Kim. He's like my Instagram bestie. We call him the functional pharmacist. It was way back at the start of the Dr. Tina Show, episode number 6. And as always, if you like the show, would love to have your support. Your reviews matter a lot. Please go leave a review. Apple Podcasts is probably the best place to do it. That helps my ranking significantly. And you can do it on any podcast platform. Also, rate, review, subscribe, send it out to your friends. I think this episode has the potential to really go viral because I think people need to hear this information. I'm hoping that if something made your mind blow today, that you'll go consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a review. That would be really helpful. And share it far and wide because people need to hear this. They are getting dosed on pharmaceutical drugs. You guys know me. If you know me, you know I do not think all pharmaceutical drugs are evil. I'm not anti-pharma. I actually think there is a way to blend. There's an art to blending low doses of pharmaceutical drugs with nutraceuticals, herbs, natural sources of health, whilst implementing the necessary lifestyle changes. We use drugs sparingly and we use them as a tool in my world, but statins straight up are bad news, in my opinion. One of my greatest goals in clinical life was to get as many people off statins as I possibly could. So I think it's a pretty evil drug and I don't see a lot of upside for it. And go listen to the episode about it, episode 6. Love you all. Thanks so much for coming and we will be back next week.